Let's begin with the landmark Supreme Court decision permitting the administration to deport migrants to third countries, not just their home nations. Paula, could you break down what the ruling actually allows and why it's such a pivotal moment in immigration policy?
Absolutely. The Supreme Court's majority gave the president authority to deport migrants to so-called safe third countries, even if those countries aren't the migrants' original homelands. This overturns lower court blocks, impacting potentially 1 million migrants, and marks a shift in executive power over immigration.
That's a huge number. Can you explain how this changes the process for migrants, especially regarding their rights to challenge deportation or receive due notice?
Previously, migrants had to be notified in writing and given a chance to contest deportation if facing potential harm. The new ruling suspends those requirements during ongoing litigation, meaning deportations can proceed even as legal questions are debated.
This brings up the classic tension between executive authority and individual rights. How did the court justify prioritizing the president's power over due process concerns?
Justice Thomas argued that the executive branch can't be hamstrung by foreign governments unwilling to repatriate citizens, especially when national safety is at stake. He emphasized not only the president's power, but his duty to act swiftly, likening it to a captain steering a ship through a storm.
But there was a strong dissent as well, correct? What were the main objections from the liberal justices?
Justice Sotomayor, writing for the dissent, accused the majority of abusing discretion and ignoring due process. She argued that the ruling bypasses careful lower court review, potentially putting migrants at risk of torture or harm in unstable countries, which raises profound constitutional questions.
Given this clash, the role of lower courts comes into sharper focus. How do nationwide injunctions factor into the current legal landscape, especially regarding presidential actions?
Nationwide injunctions allow a single district judge to halt a federal policy across all 50 states. Critics say this lets lower courts wield outsized power, while supporters argue it's essential for protecting constitutional rights. The Supreme Court's latest term is expected to clarify these boundaries.
Could you give an example of how this dynamic played out recently?
Sure, the Trump administration's efforts to restrict birthright citizenship were blocked by a district court's nationwide injunction. This issue, who can halt executive actions on a national scale, remains hotly contested and will likely shape future policies.
Let's pivot to the political fallout. Why is this Supreme Court decision considered such a significant victory for President Trump and a setback for Democrats?
The ruling reinforces Trump's agenda of tougher immigration enforcement and asserts executive strength. For Democrats, who prioritize procedural safeguards and immigrant rights, it signals a judicial endorsement of policies they view as draconian. It also sets a precedent affecting future administrations.
Does this decision change the landscape for ongoing immigration debates?
It certainly raises the stakes, emboldening executive action while putting pressure on Congress to clarify immigration statutes. The precedent may also influence how future courts interpret presidential powers during crises.
Switching gears, the president has just announced an Israel-Iran ceasefire agreement. What are the main details of this deal, and how did it materialize so rapidly after recent hostilities?
According to the president, Israel and Iran have agreed to a full ceasefire following a 12-day conflict. Each side will sequentially halt operations, and within 24 hours, the war will be officially over. The agreement follows the destruction of Iranian nuclear capabilities, a pivotal factor in negotiations.
How does this compare to previous Middle East ceasefires?
Unlike protracted, fragile truces, this agreement comes after a decisive military outcome. The rapid negotiation mirrors Cold War-era ceasefires, where clear shifts in military balance prompted diplomatic breakthroughs. However, regional skepticism remains about the ceasefire's durability.
Earlier, Iran launched missiles at a U.S. base in Qatar, but reports indicate no casualties or damage. Was this more of a symbolic gesture than an act of escalation?
Precisely. Iran's missile launch appeared calibrated to demonstrate resolve without provoking further U.S. or Israeli retaliation. By providing advance warning and targeting without causing harm, Iran signaled domestic strength while avoiding full-scale escalation, a classic move in international brinkmanship.
Does this suggest a new phase in U.S.-Iran relations?
It may signal a willingness for de-escalation, but history shows such gestures can be temporary. Trust remains fragile, and both sides are likely to remain wary, monitoring each other's next moves closely.
A recurring issue in these developments is presidential war powers. To what extent does the Constitution allow the president to order military strikes without explicit congressional approval?
Article 2 designates the president as commander-in-chief, granting authority for swift military action. However, the War Powers Resolution requires notification and, for sustained operations, congressional approval. In practice, presidents often act unilaterally during urgent threats, leading to ongoing constitutional debates.
How have past presidents navigated this ambiguity?
Presidents from Clinton to Obama have exercised similar discretion, citing national security. The main difference now is the political climate heightened scrutiny and partisanship amplify every decision, making bipartisan consensus rarer.
Public perception often hinges on how events are reported. How have media narratives shaped the response to both the Supreme Court ruling and the ceasefire news?
Media coverage reflects deep polarization. Some outlets highlight constitutional concerns and humanitarian risks, while others frame outcomes as vindication for decisive leadership. Accusations of hypocrisy such as Democrats opposing Trump's actions but defending similar moves by previous presidents fuel mistrust and confusion among the public.
Are there any examples of media needing to retract stories or adjust their coverage in light of new facts?
Yes, for instance, reports that Democrats weren't briefed on the Iran strikes were later corrected as both parties received notification. Such corrections underscore the speed of modern news cycles and the challenge of verifying information in real time.
It's not just a partisan split. Even within parties, there's debate. How have prominent Democrats and Republicans diverged on these issues, particularly regarding military action and regime change?
Senator Fetterman, for example, broke ranks by supporting the strike on Iran, viewing it as a limited, justified action rather than a war. Meanwhile, some Republicans remain skeptical about the ceasefire's permanence and the wisdom of signaling regime change, highlighting the nuanced positions within both parties.
Does this internal dissent influence policy outcomes?
Absolutely. When key figures speak out against their party lines, it can shift public discourse, complicate legislative efforts, and sometimes force leaders to seek broader consensus.
Finally, let's look ahead. With the ceasefire pending, what are the main uncertainties, and what would it take for lasting peace in the Middle East?
The ceasefire's success depends on mutual compliance and transparency from both Israel and Iran. Lasting peace will require regional cooperation, economic incentives, and sustained diplomatic engagement. The Vice President envisions a new era of prosperity if these conditions hold, but history suggests optimism should be tempered with caution.
What are the practical steps to ensure the ceasefire holds?
International verification, public commitments from both governments, and ongoing dialogue among regional stakeholders are crucial. The next 24 hours will be telling, and global attention is fixed on whether this truce can mark a turning point for the broader region.